further ado, let's get on with the show, if you like. Let me introduce you. I'm going to briefly read out some of the read out some of the bios that part of the bios that are on the website. You can read, as I say every time, full bios are on Transforming Community from the Inside Out website, so you can go and read more about our wonderful speakers. So first of all, Denise Holland. We've known Denise for quite a while. I can't actually remember where we met. But Denise, lovely lady, she's the founder of the business class performance, Excellence Within. I think you can tell, you'll see that with her banners behind her. She's based in the UK, and her business is based in the UK, which primarily upon inception focused on the field of high performance sport, which is actually her area of expertise, because she was a national athlete and she was a coach for over 20 years. But what she's noticed with the ever increasing demands on local government, that she's to address poor productivity and young people suffering from stress-related illnesses, Denise has extended her work to the field of education, hence her being with us today. And then Terry Broughton, she's a passionate lifelong learner. She's a former head teacher, consultant, change worker, trainer and coach, as well as a leader, a mother and a grandmother, and a published writer and an artist. She's got lots under her belt. Terry's developed her coaching career over many years, and her current clients are from the private sector, education, leadership, and people who are seeking more clarity in their lives. So, lady, there you go. That's the official stuff. We're gonna jump into the non-official stuff, if you like, now. So, welcome. Really, really pleased to have you here. It's lovely to have you in conversation. I don't know who would like to start, but I always start these sessions off with asking you to share a little bit about your personal story, and even to kind of bringing our theme, Community Begins With You. Maybe you can share a little bit about how you see that in terms of your journey and the work that you're doing today. Would you like to kick off, Denise?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. So, yeah, I mean, I've 20 years in performance sport, and I left my role as national coach for Scotland in 2013, and I left it a bit prematurely, actually, ahead of the Commonwealth Games in 2014. And during that time, it was a very uncomfortable time in my life, and I came across the principles by chance through Michael Neal and Jamie Smart's books. And during that time, I had a real epiphany in as much as I discovered that, gracious, am I really making this all up? And it started my journey, and that was kind of 5 years ago, and I've never looked back. And now I realize that I was really suffering, and I thought I was suffering from the circumstance of, in effect, not being able to go to the Commonwealth Games, and a job that I had done for, 4.5 years, 65-hour weeks, traveling from Kent to Glasgow every week. And I thought I was hurting from that. And then I realized, in a profound insight, that I was actually just having thinking that was causing me suffering, and that it wasn't coming from there. It was optional. It wasn't inevitable given the circumstances. So after that, I mean, I just have a real passion for the youth. I've always worked with athletes, and since then I've kind of had sport as my business, but it seems that I've got into working with all youth and special needs and people with diagnosis as well. And it's absolutely fascinating and just a beautiful conversation that no matter what the diagnosis of the young person, we're all the same. So that's kind of me, really. And now I'm working in universities, in schools, primarily with sport, but with a performance well-being aspect to it as well, which is fantastic. I call it my 50-50 program. 50% technical, tactical, on-court stuff, and then 50% classroom and inner conversation of performance well-being. And it's just beautiful.
I can tell that they really love what you're doing. I actually realised I forgot to say what the name of the session is, A New Way of Being with Youth. We're going to explore that, the new way of being, which I've heard, that reminded me hearing a little bit of your story. Thank you. So over to Terry. How about you?
Well, I came into education a long way round, I think. I grew up thinking, well, a dyslexic child, looked after child, um, thinking nothing much should really be expected of me. And that was my belief. And I sort of went through school. I think I survived school. And it wasn't really until my 30s that I went into education myself. And I think it began with an A-level pottery. Um, some people were sort of very kind to me, said some nice things, and they said, why didn't you do an A-level in art, which I did. And then I went on to eventually take a degree and so on. But until that time, my thinking was very different. I then eventually became an art therapist for a short time and was working with people with all sorts of labels, really lovely people. And I remember being in a room one day with one particular man, something called a snoozlem, a sort of sensory room. And I was stroking his head. He had his head sort of on my knee. And I remember thinking, you're labeled as special needs. And then I thought, have I got special needs? And then I thought, well, my son has, my daughter has. And then I thought, well, maybe we've all got special needs. We all have them. And it was that one thought that actually took me into mainstream education to take a look and see what was going on. And in order to do that, I had to go and get a GCSE in maths. So I'd got my first class honours degree. But for me, a GCSE maths meant the world. Because I would have told you once that it was impossible. I joined a community college in Leicestershire. And the first thing that hit me at that time was the artwork around the walls of the community college. And it was very much related to sort of still lives, rock bands, self-portraits. But I thought it didn't really tell me anything about these rather challenging students that I was working with. And so I immediately undertook a master's degree to look at adolescent development, and then at that time its relationship to art and design education. And I've just printed off some of those images here, because what happened, I'll hold it up in a minute, but what happened, I asked the students a couple of questions. How do you see yourself? And how would you like to be seen? And to help me to get to know them, really. So these rather ordinary looking students, lovely, lovely souls that they were producing things. I don't know if you can see that. You can see wires going into somebody's head and a gag. And that was about us feeding him full of information, but nobody really being interested in what he had to say.
Wow.
There's a girl here who's done herself as an advent calendar. Tiny, tiny mouse, because she said that no one was listening to her. And there's sort of locked windows on there. And the more I looked, the more I was surprised by the images that were being made. But what shocked me, I think, was that unlike any other A-level project, rather than doing a body of work and then having a final piece, these students had several final pieces, because as their thoughts were changing about themselves on a daily basis, their images were changing, and they wanted to get into the work of other artists and find out what their lives were like. And we were involved in very deep discussion. They chose to keep journals, keep diaries, write letters, write poetry. It was incredible, and so much so that it was written into the national curriculum.
Wow.
What surprised me was I just thought, there's something for me to learn here. And so I thought, what would happen if I asked the same questions to primary school children, or I went to an old people's home? And I wanted to look at the community and look at what was happening with people's thinking. Now, I had none of this understanding at the time, although this is who we are. I hadn't had these conversations. But I walked into a primary school asking the same questions. And if I show you one of their images, and this is just indicative of a lot of their images. This is an amazing butterfly with sort of glitter and bright colours, and that was the response to the same question. And it just got me thinking, well, what happens between being a very young child going into the educational system to being these troubled adolescents? What's going on? And then I came to the conclusion, well, we educate them. and what's that about? And I thought, we're educating, you know, it's not only inside institutions, in schools, it's outside, it's through parents' conversations, through the media, through the things, the music that children are listening to. And I've got a picture here. This is my granddaughter, Millie. And at this stage, we were at a park and she was blowing bubbles, running around, falling over, speaking to strangers, not worrying about whether she got it wrong. There was just not much in her head. She was very, very in the moment. And what I've come to realize is that that is available for every single one of us, if it were not for the stories that we tell ourselves. Me too, hence not going into education until my 30s and getting a feel for it. So that was a real driver for me. And I started to look at popular psychology, train in some counselling. I knew I was missing something, but I didn't know what it was. And then eventually I was running a school. You know, I could go on forever really and talk about that, but having left the school afterwards, I joined Jamie Smart to do his Clarity training course, where I first heard about this understanding. I'd read a couple of bits before, like Denise, and it rocked my world, because for me, this understanding is and has been the missing link in everything I've been looking at and studying. You know, this genuinely is the missing link. So that's a sort of very brief potted history of how I got here.
Yeah, and obviously working in the schools, and you're working with youth, and you could see what's happening traditionally. So there's definitely this is what we want to explore, this new way of being with youth. So again, thank you, Terry. That's really, really helpful. And thank you for showing those wonderful pictures, images. I mean, those images, they're, you know, very visual, but they say a lot, don't they, from the young child up to the now. Look what's happening at teenage years. It's a completely different story, right?
Absolutely.
So, Denise, can you tell us a little bit more about your work and how the principles, the inside out understanding of influencing the work that you're doing? Because I've heard some of your stories before, and I think there's loads for you to share with us.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes in my coaching as a sports coach is around the fact that athletes know very much about this kind of performance zone state, this flow state. And if you ask an athlete about performance, there is this sort of intuitive knowing around it. It just happens, you know, with less on my mind, it really just happens. And you hear comments like, you know, it was automatic, or, you know, I didn't know what happened out there. One athlete said that to me, I just didn't know what happened out there. And it was the finest performance of her life, really. And there is this deeper knowing that if they leave it alone, there is this potential to just create performance and for it to just flow through them. But then on another level, there is this almost conditioning, if you like, that we kind of understand that we need to work on the performance. We need to work as well on ourselves in order to be able to produce performance. And for me, I saw that they're kind of completely opposite ends of this kind of living spectrum. And the work I'm doing now with this group of university students is very much around falling in love with whatever they're doing, whether it's their university work, their dissertation, their sporting life, being part of the student union, and to be able to completely and utterly get involved in that without it needing to be anything. So without there needing to be any outcome specific, any need. And so that's been really beautiful for me, because ordinarily we would be pretty much thinking about the outcome, thinking about the processes that would lead to the outcome. And we're not even interested in those processes so much anymore. There are skills, and there are, you need to have these skills that we need to learn. But, we're born to learn, we're born to develop. And when I point students to our innate capacity to grow and to learn and to live, they're almost shocked about what's innate to us and what's natural to us. And we've made, I think, such a kind of big deal over what it is that we need to produce. And we're living in this misunderstanding that whatever we're trying to achieve in life, or because I'm thinking from performance now, that somehow defines us. And so all of this natural capacity we have as human beings to just be, to just create moment to moment, gets completely thwarted by this conditioning that it needs to be anything, and it needs to be of a particular level, and it needs to get a particular grade. And all of that, I think, is just our human conditioning and a misunderstanding that we're not enough, that we're not okay unless we have that, unless we achieve that, unless we are doing that and doing it to a particular level. And when students see, so there's nothing to achieve here really, it doesn't need to define them as human beings, they're already whole and complete, and there's this infinite capacity to create. There's this amazing intelligence that's just working behind the scenes, not only in our physical body, running my digestive system, running my respiratory system, but also it's throwing me thoughts in the moment all the time. And I'm not on that. Yet I used to think I was on my thinking. That was really down to Denise. And it isn't. It isn't up to me. No more than it's up to me to know and to understand and govern, the food I eat in my mouth, and it goes through. I'm not on that. And when you start to see how that bodily system works, that physical immune system to keep us healthy and to keep us well, you can also see the psychological immune system, as we might call it, to keep us well. We're not supposed to hold on to thoughts. And so I'm really focused on not working on the problem with students and the issues. I'm working on going right underneath to see how is it created, not just for them, but for everyone, for all of us as human beings. And that seems to do something for people. It removes the limitation and the restrictions that students have got going in their conditioning, and it allows this bandwidth of potential to come through them. Otherwise, the bandwidth is so small. I'm not saying it doesn't come through, because of course it does. Wisdom will come through. Of course it will. We know sometimes when we're on our backside, wisdom shows up for us and shows us the way. But there is something beautiful since my understanding, and I see happening in students, is the more they understand, the more the bandwidth just of creativity and potential just opens up.
Mm. Wow, thanks, Denise. That was beautiful, beautiful. Can just really feel your passion and the passion, I think that's the word, for what you're doing, and for what you're seeing in life particularly, I think. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel very grateful, very blessed every single day that there's nowhere to get to.
There's a question. Okay, somebody missed the question Terry originally asked the students. Can she repeat it, please?
Yeah, certainly. So I asked them, how do they see themselves, and how would they like to be seen? And to Denise's point, it's really interesting, because these students were working until 9 o'clock at night. Now, there was absolutely no pressure for them to do that. I would have been happy for them to have gone home. But what happened, they really, although they were sort of so involved in the project, it wasn't about, am I getting an A-level in art, which is, to Denise's point, is it all about the grade? It was like, we are loving this. And so students who were not taking an A-level would come to see me and say, I want some of what they've got. What are they doing? Which is why I was there till 9 o'clock at night. And it was just phenomenal. And then the English teacher said, I think I'd like to take that on board. Maybe I could do something along the same lines. The French teacher wanted to do the same. But I think what's really important for anybody that's listening is that it's about really listening to those students, really genuinely listening, with not too much on your own mind about sort of steering it where it should be going. I had no idea where this was going. I had no idea that some of them would produce sort of 7 amazing paintings or pieces of sculpture or some textile work, but at the end of it, I had no idea. So I had no agenda. And I think that's quite difficult for a teacher with a curriculum to teach. But as Denise was saying, when they weren't worrying about, oh, is this going to get me a whatever grade, and they were just immersed in what they were doing, they got amazing grades. It was incredible. So yes, how do you see yourself? How would you like to be seen? And I think for a couple, when they really had exhausted what they were doing, I said, how do you think other people see you? And again, this total mismatch. So there were teenage girls very into fashion and makeup. How I would like to be seen with these, I wish we had longer, really, very sophisticated women looking very beautiful. And when I was saying, how do you see yourself? There were these very young children, thumbs in mouths, very, very different, and I would never have known. And so one of my students had anorexia. There was a lad with issues about, he came from a very religious family. He was questioning his belief systems. Like, where did all this come from? But it gave, teenagers the opportunity to be able to ask questions. And I think that's what works so well with it. So that answers the question.
Oh, well, you've answered the question about what the question is, for sure, and you've added some really rich stuff on top of that too. And I can see why somebody would ask that question, because if my girls are grown up now, but I think, in those teenagers particularly, that would have been a wonderful thing to have asked them. I mean, I had no understanding back in those days. But yeah, for me, it feels like as you're really connecting with people, you're really connecting with the youth, you're really connecting, you care as well. And I think that's so important, isn't it? That people know.
Not that I'm anyone to give any advice, but if you find out where your students are coming from, which is really what I wanted to do in the first place, because the things around the wall weren't telling me, and you do connect with them from where they're at that time, then the education comes in. It comes in afterwards. And really that's what Denise was saying too.
It's been a common thread. The session before this, we were talking to social workers, and that was, the common thread. It was meet them where apparently that's what they're taught. Meet the client, if you like, where they are. And that's what I'm hearing in what you're saying. It's like meet the kids where they are, meet and show them. It comes down to caring. That's what I'm hearing more and more.
And the staff, Sheila, and the staff. You know, I joined a community of teachers and an academy, and part of my brief was come and help support the change of an institution. You know, a sort of changing culture. Well, one person doesn't go in and do that, but it's about meeting people where they're at and being inclusive. It's not all about the leadership team. You know, it's about a whole community of people working together to a common goal. And I am very passionate about that.
Two passionate ladies on this call about that. You know, other sessions have been like that. Everybody's very passionate about. I think, you know, once you get a sense of this inside out understanding, the 3 principles, then yeah, most people go through the evangelical stage, don't they? And want to share and tell everybody about it, but you've got to kind of wait and, as we're talking about, meet people where they are and not blast it at them.
I went to volunteer to help at an art school not far from here, a painting school. So there were 14 people in the room, and I was supporting a gentleman with a diagnosis of dementia. Now I know that's not who he is. That's where he's at, but it's not who he is. I totally understand that. But I was looking around the room at the different easels, and everybody was given the same landscape picture, A4 landscape coloured picture of a local Norfolk artist. And just as they start, I haven't got them here to show you, but as people started to paint, they were using completely different colours, different ways of applying the paint. And it just spoke to me of separate realities. They had the same image. There was no arguing with it, and they were being shown how to reproduce the same image. But they didn't see the same thing. None of them saw the same thing. And it hit me again. Realities, you know, we get something, we think we know what we're looking at, but we're interpreting it all the time in our own way, aren't we? Just the way we do, you know.
Absolutely. That's a really great example, isn't it? A great metaphor. Yeah. Just to jump to Denise, and so, you know, Terry brought up the separate realities. How do you see that play out with your youth in your work?
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? We recently had a game actually, and it was so fascinating. And I used the obviously we talk about the game in the feedback afterwards, and they lost the game, and their feeling states, it was really interesting because I would never really have considered how it is that they're feeling. They would just be ranting and carrying on and really, you know, going into a lot of chat about losing the game, and then getting distracted and blaming the umpire and blaming each other, and it was this and that. And so we did a little bit of an exercise on, let's just have a look to see where your feeling state's coming from. So everyone in the room went round and actually described what it is they were feeling. And we just lost the game. And every single one of the students was different. So, you know, we had anger, we had frustration, we had actually, you know, it was a good game. And they were better than us. And there was all sorts of different perceptions of this loss. And that got them curious. It really did get them curious about, well, hang on a minute, here's the same thing on the outside, it's a loss, and every single one of them is having a different experience. So what's going on there? And it was very interesting because we did it again the following week, and we didn't have a game that week. And every single one of them, of course, had changed the way they were now feeling about this loss. And I said, well, what do you make of that then? Because nothing's changed. It was still a loss. And they started to see that something could remain exactly the same on the outside, and that their experience was transitory, it was impermanent, and it started to really trigger, well, if that's the case, then I don't need to get, I don't need to be taking this perception so seriously, because it seems to be changing all the time. And then we delved a little bit deeper to really seeing, yeah, it's not coming from where you think it's coming from. It's just coming from thought in the moment. And the nature of that is such that it changes all the time. We don't know why we get the thoughts we do. It's one of these beautiful kind of mysteries about how it is our human psyche works. And so that started to free people up, that it's an optional thing. And we can talk about whether there is choice. I mean, we can go into a completely different conversation. I won't go there right now, but it's not inevitable that you are going to feel really rubbish and you need to stay really rubbish. Like, that is optional, because it's not coming from the loss, it's coming from thought in the moment. And that changed things that kind of changed the entire direction of our season program, because we were able to very quickly move on to our skill development and our tactical development and having more fun with it. Okay, what can we create then against that type of opposition? And it just opened up for us. Instead of us getting bogged down, our minds cleared. And when we reconnected with our mental health, we just seemed to have so much more available to us as a group to play the sport. And then that started to be realized in every part of their life. They started to realize that their experiences of situations and even the things people are saying to them, maybe that's not coming from there actually. It just gave them the power back. It gave them that power to, as Sydney Banks says, use the principles, use the power of thought in a way which really serves them, and not in a way which is going to cause suffering.
So does that mean that I've never been a performance coach. I coach people and in business and personal situations. I've never done the athlete stuff, and because you're coaching people to play games, and I want to use the word to win.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that's what I'm curious about. So with the way that you're talking, we're here to have fun and enjoy, and I guess it's going to be the same when I'll probably pass over to Terry as well in schools. Kids are taught to pass exams and be successful, etc., etc. So could you answer that for me first, Denise, and then maybe Terry afterwards for that? So what direction do you point them in? If you're not pointing them, because I'm hearing you're not pointing them in the we must win direction. I might be wrong about that, so I'm curious.
And that's interesting, isn't it? That's an interesting that you're hearing that. So I have been in performance, all my life, and I for sure want to win. All right, so when I go out to compete, I really want to win. There's no doubt about that. But here's the difference. I am not invested in that outcome as if it says anything about me now as a human being. All right. And I am out to create a winning performance using these three principles, like not using as in a using way, but knowing that that's all that's going on. So yeah, I'm not going out to just see what comes through me in the moment, laissez-faire. No. I'm out there to put my skills out there on the court. And this understanding, and here's the difference, allows athletes to show up and have 100% skill capacity that they've got up to that moment and have it out there on the court, on the pitch. Whereas if they're invested in the outcome and they believe that somehow that there is this consequence that is somehow going to say something about them as a human being in a really unpleasant way, then they're not going to be able to have the freest of minds. And, you know, I've been out with national sides, and they've had 65, 70% skill capacity out there even before they've left the dressing room because they've just got so much thinking around what is going to happen. And so now, no, we want to go out there and do the best that we can do given our skill and our body at that moment, but it's in a much freer way, and it's not linked to our well-being. It's not contingent on the performance outcome anymore, and they know that. They profoundly know that, whereas before we didn't. I didn't, as a coach. I thought it defined me as a coach, and I thought it defined me as a human being.
And no, I love what you've shared, Denise. And just as you said that, my thinking went, but in the traditional sports, right? So that aren't coaches, like I'm just thinking about, I don't know much about sports, but I know that like in football, don't managers get sacked because the performance has been rubbish? And you know, they said that bring in a new coach, that's the answer, bring a new coach. It's their fault. I'm thinking about, I mean, actually, Terry, I'm from Leicester originally, and so of course the Leicester City story of football, soccer for those American friends that are watching, was, you know, that sort of that huge win, and then woof, right down, and then the manager got blamed, I think, didn't he? It was his fault, and they sacked him. So that's from that traditional point of view. I'm curious about your take on that.
Is that me or is that myself?
Yeah, using it for you, Denise, because I'm talking about sports, and then I'll go to, definitely.
I'm happy to stay with that because, you know, in essence, you know, I thought I was going to the Com Games and then I didn't, you know, to remain totally professional. And so, yeah, if the results or the outcomes aren't what the organisation feels should be at the time, then yeah, you could lose your job. But you know, even in that, your feeling state and your perspective and perception does not come from there.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from thought in the moment. And in a moment, everything about my, if you like, losing my role went in a moment. So even the fact that potentially you could lose your role, your experience of it is still coming from thought in the moment. And actually, I wouldn't have come across this amazing understanding that changed my life had that not happened to me. Mm. So, you know, we think we're in the driving seat, but we're not. We're just the vehicle for performance and vehicle for life. We're not, it seems to me anyway, we're not actually driving the ship. We're the ship.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you, Denise. I think it's really, really helpful to know, isn't it, that we are not what we think. Yeah, so Terry, in terms of school, going back to that original question of, you know, success, because that's what we're teaching kids, right? To at the end of the day, they've got to pass exams and et cetera, et cetera. So how do you see that now? And what's different in the classroom when you're teaching from this different paradigm?
Well, I'm not a classroom teacher, but I do go in to work with schools and leadership and so on. And very recently, if I tell you about the most recent, I've been out of schools all the time, and speaking about this understanding, I can say, Denise, that for me, once I got this, me too, this includes me too. So I've spent my whole teaching career supporting others to be the best they can be, to the best of my ability.
You know.
And Denise and I had a conversation, you know, if Ofsted were coming into the school and we did really well, I would know, because we're an amazing community, we pull together, we've got amazing kids, I would just know that. But if Ofsted came in and didn't say something so good, at that time, I would have known it was my leadership. Nothing to do with anybody else. Really self-effacing, stuck in my head, in my own thinking, having having really understood that, you know, we are not broken. We do not need fixing. We just don't. And being pointed in this direction has made such a tremendous difference. So first of all, in my own life, and I was recently asked to, I coach a particular head teacher who said, we've got 10 boys in our school and we are really struggling with them. We don't know what to do. Can you come and talk to them about, she was saying, can you come and talk to them about what you talked to me about? And I had a ball. You know, I don't like the term unteachable, but that was a term that was raised. And so I said, well, I would come and work with these 10 boys for 2 days. And on the third day, I would go and see them in their classes. And 6 weeks later, I'd like to do a follow-up. And so I said that I would take them in 2 groups of 5. And lots of emails came beforehand with lots of warnings and caveats. And don't worry, we won't leave you on your own. These were 10-year-old boys. And so I walked in and met the first group of 5 students, and what an amazing bunch of boys. But the first thing I did, I don't know if you've ever seen blob cards. So you get these little amorphous figures with no expressions on their faces, but in doing different actions. And I just spread them out on the table and sort of introduced myself. And I said, you know, I'd written a letter to their parents and I was saying, how do you feel about being here today? So they each picked a card up and said what to them that emotion meant, because no facial expression at all. And then I said, as we go through the day and you have different thinking and you're not feeling that feeling anymore, see if you can pick another card up. Well, within 10 minutes, they were like this. I felt like this, but I don't now, I feel like this. And they were being supportive of each other. And what I spoke to them about initially was who they really are, and the fact, you know, and labels that we're given in school, and they were telling me their labels that they'd been given. And so I suggested that there might be this diamond within us, inside us, you know, that doesn't have any labels attached to it. And these labels are a bit like lumps of poo sometimes, because they cover the diamond up. We don't want anyone to see that. And one boy, his name was Malachi, said, I don't want anyone to see that. And he was quite a tough boy. And he was saying right off the bat, you know, I don't want anyone to see that. And he related to this varnish around the outside. And I said to the boys, well, what's inside this diamond then? So no teaching, lots of connecting with the boys. And I printed this off with those other pictures. They wrote these words. Are they back to front or?
No, they're perfect. Yeah, great.
Well, they wrote it. There was no, well, do you think you might be? Being powerful and what that, there was not, they said, well, this is who we are. They knew. And then we did all sorts of things with various bits of Play-Doh and played various games. And one lad who I was told was a bit of a ringleader, couldn't join in teams, became a team leader. And the children were able to give him feedback. You know, is Malachi being a good team leader? Well, actually, he's not right at this moment. What do you think this is about then? What are you thinking of? And he was able to take what they were saying on board. There was no, oh no, my varnish is cracked. He wanted to hear what they were saying because it was coming from a different place. And then the second lot that came in the afternoon came with a caveat, well, you won't get anything out of these. They just won't engage. And because I had no thinking on my own mind, I thought I'd just see what came to me in the moment. And I said, who can speak Japanese? And I think they were so surprised. They said, none of us. And I said, well, excuse me, my nose is running. Well, what if I told you you'd be speaking Japanese in 10 minutes, in half an hour, counting 1 to 10? Do you think that's possible? And basically the answer was no, not boys like us, which I found very sad. And by the time they'd been doing some actions and pictures and we'd had a bit of a joke about how we were going to get there, they were all speaking Japanese. And then we went on to talk about diamonds and various other things. they had 4 hours one day with them and 2 hours the next, and that swapped over to the other group. But one particular boy of the Japanese lads was absent on day one, and the member of staff came to me and said, well, could he join us on day two? You know, he's missed all of this interesting stuff. And I said, of course he can. So the boys came in, the first thing they did, they said, konnichiwa. And they sat down, and I said, well, I want to know, were you being good parrots yesterday, or did you really learn this stuff? They were like, no, we've learned so much. And I said, well, what about this 1 to 10 in Japanese? I thought we'd start there because it was so positive. Not that this is about positive thinking, but I thought it was a great place to start. And the lad who was absent counted 1 to 10 in Japanese with the others. And I said, oh, did you already know how to do this? And he said, no idea. And I said, but you've just counted with them. How did that happen? And these other 4 boys of the group of 5 had rung him up, got him to come into school early. They'd drawn pictures with him. They'd done the actions with him. They'd repeated it with him. Now, there was no teacher telling them to do that. Like with this identity project, there was nobody saying stay until 9 o'clock in the evening. But they were coming from a place of wanting each other to succeed. It was incredible. And then during that time, I looked over at the lad that was absent. There was such a lovely feeling in the room. It was palpable. You could see it in the staff who were observing. And I just looked at the lad who was absent. And my initial thought was to ask him what he was thinking. But that isn't what came out of my mouth. So I said, what are you feeling right now? Now, a 10-year-old boy with his peers, and he looked me in the eye and he just said, I feel loved. I feel loved, which is, for me, what this is all about. And I said, well, you know why that is, don't you? And he said, oh, I don't know. And I said, that's because it's who you are. That's your diamond. That's who you are. Now, that's easy for me to tell you this story. So the next day I'm in their classes. The boys they were telling me wouldn't be joining in with lessons, had their hands up, were playing musical instruments, were joining in. I mentioned the name Malachi. You know, he was amazing. But I was also listening to how they were being spoken to and the connections that were being made. And I don't need to go into all that now, but what I will do is just before this call, I didn't know if we'd get to this, just got some feedback 6 weeks later. And it was a 10-minute conversation with them. And I just want to tell you what some of them were saying. So one lad said, this is 6 weeks later, I am wise, powerful, unique, and I feel loved and I am loved. When I let my thoughts settle, I can allow some space for some new thoughts to come in. It's hard when I'm in the caterpillar soup. That's a whole nother story. He said, thoughts pass like clouds. And he remembered the story. Somebody else said, when we let our thinking settle down, the clouds go through our heads and new fresh thoughts come in. When we are babies, these are various children speaking, when we are babies, we are born confident. We're not born with all this silly thinking that stops us doing things. Somebody else here has said, I liked how when we looked at a £20 note and how it was scrunched up, trod on, spat at, tore off, and it was still worth £20 and nothing took away from its value. That's like us. It doesn't matter what happens to us because we're still worth what we were born to be. Somebody else said, I learned that when connection is lost, it's like we are lost. And the last few comments, I wish my dirt on my diamond was invisible because I don't like it. I feel really confident in my learning and I know I have improved. I don't ask for so much attention. And then he says, ask my teachers, which I thought was funny. And then somebody else has said, well, your brain isn't who you are. And there's so many comments there. They're just a few of them. And that was 6 weeks later. I spoke, this was a few months back now. I spoke to the head or had a text just telling me she can't believe the difference in these boys. You know, and
How long did you have with them in total, Terry?
I had, so they were split into 2 groups. So Group A, Group B. Group A, 4 hours. Group B, 2 hours. The next morning, Group B, 4 hours. Group A, 2 hours. A short amount of time. Now, I think that this needs more follow-up and more, but, you know, I wish to goodness that I hadn't waited till in my 30s to go back into education. If I'd have understood this, who knows what would have been possible. I now believe I could have been a brain surgeon, but I didn't believe that then, and that's for sure.
Well,
yeah, and it leaves us free to be who we were born to be. You know, free to be me, free to be you. Yeah.
Very inspiring. And Jonelle Sims has just written in and said such inspiring stories from both of you. Thank you.
Welcome.
All I can say to her, wow, such inspiring stories. Absolutely amazing. We need more of this, don't we? We really do. I know both of you ladies belong to something called, I don't know, it's just popped into my mind, the Web of Wellbeing. Would you like to share a little bit? I mean, I don't know if you would like to, and if you don't, that's fine. We can move on to something else. But it just popped in. I'd forgotten all about it. Wow.
Yeah.
The Web of Wellbeing, right? That's what it stands for. So, would you like to share with Denise? Would you like to share what that is and how it works? And because my understanding is it's a volunteer. Well, you explain. You explain.
Okay. So. I guess how it came about initially was, I think people might be aware of 3pgc.org, which is an organisation, charity set up initially to help spread this understanding throughout the world. So we were initially a community of interest group. So they started to have a community of interest groups for education, for mental health. I think there's one for Spanish. For business, there was different groups, and we got together just a group of, say, I think it's 5 or 6 of us, and then it sort of, with all of that freedom and freedom of expression and creativity, we kind of together, I think there's probably 8 of us now, created this WOW project initiative, really, which was and is just a platform really to showcase the good work being done around the world with our youth. And the whole focus really is to have something that's really for the youth, created by the youth. And so that you can sign up to be a WOW mentor, which just simply means that you're working with the youth 100% from this understanding of the 3 principles behind the human experience, and that you can have a platform to tell people and show people and share your good work with those students. And so there is a website called that's www.webofwellbeing, and our hashtag is #WOW. And we are now in discussion with the new 3pgc.org board to maintain that community of interest group. I think we just call ourselves at this point the WOW initiative. So it's an exciting time. I think we're kind of further along than some of the other groups. Perhaps we've had a logo competition for the young people to design the logo, and that's been just fabulous all around the world. The idea is that we link as well children and youth around the world that are looking into their human experience, and to be able to share stories with each other around the globe, and so that we can unite the youth of the world and their well-being. So yeah, I think that's, Terry, would you like to add to that?
Only that I had the privilege of this project that I was talking about with the boys came under the banner of the WOW project.
Yeah.
And had the privilege of going out to Nepal. I've been going out to Nepal for the last 8 years now. But last year, it was so recent that I kept thinking, was it last year? But we're in February. I went back to Nepal again. I work with women's groups and children out there. So sweet working with someone this year, and one of the principals, I said, well, what do you think you've got from us being here this time? What are you taking away? And he said that I really need to connect with my students lessons. Because there's a lot of didactic teaching at the front of the room out there. But I met with Jenny Anderson and Dave Ellery, and we just travelled around to various schools, again, sharing this understanding. But what takes me back to Nepal, or what used to take me back and still does really, is their sense of community. It's stunning. It's a bit like going back in time. And when I think, oh dear, they say to me things like, we want to be like the West. And I think, well, you've got some values that we can learn from. But that we took we call it the WOW project, and we took that out there as well. Yeah, it's an amazing thing to be a part of. And if anyone's on this call who are interested, if you go to that website, you could show interest. You know, you could just go and have a look and see what the work that is going on and the countries that it is appearing in. And you might even want to do some work yourself with you. So I'm not sure who's listening to the call, whether it's people who are principals practitioners or people who
we don't know. We don't know. That's the beauty of this. We don't know who's listening. So that's webofwellbeing.com, did you say?
webofwellbeing.org.
.org. Okay, cool. So people can go to that website and check it all out and have a look. And is it, because you saying, Denise, earlier on, it's for children and youth, is there a particular age group, or is it all ages?
It's all ages. We called it youth, actually. So, you know, that we didn't want to have any age on it because we didn't want us to be restricted by anything conceptual. So we just, it's just creating itself.
Beautiful. So you kind of started it off and it's got a life of its own, unfolding on its own. And
very much. Very much. Yeah. So we have no idea where it's going, but the idea is to showcase the great work. And so, you know, if we can have some real evidence of this understanding around the world, then head teachers that are looking to tackle problems of bullying and eating disorders and stress and anxiety and depression and all of those unsavories that show up in the lives of the youth in school, then go to the webofwellbeing.org website, because this work for sure has a massive impact on those areas of children's lives. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm grateful, Terry, you know, for sharing some of those results that you've had and showing the pictures as well. That was really impactful to see firsthand what's happening in the classroom. Did you want to say something? I think Terry, you wanted to say something to add to what Denise was saying. So
it's gone.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's gone. It's fine.
That's fine. I know you were going to say something. If anybody's got any questions or comments, Q&A box, we're on the last 10 minutes. What seems to happen a lot on these sessions is right at the last minute, start coming in. I'm encouraging you while we've still got 10 minutes left to ask these ladies anything you'd like to. So what occurs to me is the how question comes up a lot. So, for example, Terry, how are you getting the work to, I don't want to make assumptions, so I'm not going to. How are you getting the work to go into classrooms? How are you getting the work to work with head teachers? How are you getting the work to work with the people that you're, I suppose we're talking about youth particularly today. So curious if people out there, you know, have a passion to work with youth, what would your suggestion be?
Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. I can tell you my own journey, and that's
to inspire people. I think it triggers things for people. Yeah.
So I retired from my school. I did some training. Along with that comes a little bit of a story, but I did some training, and I remember going into the very first school. Somebody had contacted me before when I had my previous role, but I had no time. You know, I was involved in the academy that I was working with. And I remember, you know, having all my very carefully prepared slides and notes and not to go off script. And I was very nervous because I was used to what I was used to. And I remember being in this room and just, it didn't seem to matter in the same way, the script. And genuinely being with the staff that were in that room. And I remember drawing that diagram and talking about us as professional practitioners and the messages that we pick up and we think, well, they're not good enough or said, and you know, lots of sort of requirements of us. And when I drew the varnish, and the teachers were nodding like, we get this, we just get this. And it was a very different training to any training I'd ever run before. And I felt more comfortable with it. And I remember on the train on the way home, thinking, come on, Terry, do you really believe what you were just saying? And come on, it's just you and me now. You know, do you believe that? And absolutely, you know, I believed what I was saying. And again, this little voice said, well, is it true for you then? And do you know what, Sheila? It never occurred to me. So supporting others, getting things out there, getting things done, never ever occurred to me. And it was that, so that was my pivotal turning point, if you like, in the way I teach or train or work with others. So then I was asked to work, basically it's through recommendation. So if you look at terrybroughton.com, you'll see a very naff website, which I don't use because all of my work has come through recommendation. I'd love to tell you that I'm out there putting lots of bids in, but I'm not. And I've just been contacted by a very large college to work with a team within the college. And I've put a bid together with the help of somebody else. Bless her, she supported me to do it. So every piece of my work since I've been in training has been through word of mouth, everything. Oh, that's not true. There's a company called Waterfront who had me on their books, and I did some training through them, but mainly I've just been invited. And it's the same with private clients. When people see that the work you do is getting results, more people want those results. And that's how it's happened. And well, that is how it's happened. There's a bit of me that wants to say, oh no, you know, I have this amazing website. I don't, you know, I have some business cards which I remember to give occasionally. But it's, and I have a steady flow of work. And the other thing, if I could recommend anything to anybody, is get yourself a coach. I have an amazing, I have Jan Chipman is my coach. And I think I'm very fortunate, an amazing soul. And we just go to this space where there's a little bit of silence, and I just, you know, bless her, I'm very lucky. So I would say, you know, when you're doing the work and getting the results, then more people want to find out about it. So for me, that's how it's happened.
Fabulous, thank you. I find that's yeah, nobody said that yet. And yet on any of these sessions, get yourself a coach, a mentor maybe. Yeah, coach, mentor. Wonderful.
Yeah, Jan is my mentor. She's not.
Yeah.
We call it coaching, don't we? But
yeah. Some people call it mentoring, but yeah, it's very, very interesting to hear you say that. Thank you.
It does help.
Oh, for sure. I'm 100% believer in coaching, of course. How about you, Denise? What would you say to that question?
So yeah, I guess my journey for the last 5 years has been, when I first saw this, has been probably a bit different to Terry's, in as much as I did contact lots of schools. You know, I was really gung-ho and wanted to get this out into schools, and I didn't have any success at all actually in the first stages. I had a couple of teachers that were interested, but my grounding wasn't strong enough. It wasn't good. It wasn't, I don't know if you can't measure it, but I was still trying to get them to see something. I was, rather than hold a space of connection in which they would see something. And that was a bit of a subtle difference for me. And so I found myself actually very fortunately on the Pransky and Associates mentee program, which was just unbelievable and completely helped me to just deepen my understanding, deepen my grounding as to how this works. And in that, as soon as I really gave up the whole sport thing altogether, in terms of seeing that it was a bit of a belief that I wanted to work in sport and I wanted to work with a particular level athlete, even, you know, my arrogance, as soon as that settled down, I saw that for what it was. I then started to get interest and then started to work with young people, and even, you know, not just in sport. I started to just get clients in human performance. I kind of changed my whole website to human performance, and there's such a massive spectrum because we're all in that game, you know, we all wake up every day. And from there I started to work with people and they would be impacted, and I realized that's very little to do with me because we have no control over that. But in my grounding, I was able to just stay in that authentic connection, that space of peace and space of love with them. And yeah, I did need to go through some professional training in order to get to that point. I'm not saying it's necessary. I'm just saying that's what happened to me. And so from there, I was inspired to just look at, well, how is it you can get into schools, and what is it you know already, Denise? Well, netball's my game, has been for 20 years. And as a national coach, I was able to use that to get people to listen to me, I suppose. You know, there was an audience there, they were prepared to listen to a national coach. And so I've used the sport in a way to, and not even consciously, it's just happened to get an introduction through the front door. And now that seems to be working, and now I've got inquiry from several different schools. And the thing also that seems to have come up is now I'm getting contact from parents from different sports clubs for me to coach one-to-one their youngster, so that they have a better experience of being involved in sport and a better experience of school life. So I love the one-to-ones. I think it's beautiful, and I love I've recently just worked for 10 weeks, 1 hour a week with a young chap who's 14 years old and diagnosed autistic on the Asperger's. And he kept getting excluded all the time from school for naughty behaviours. And oh, what a delight to work with him, and for him to start to see that his anger was actually not coming from this horrible teacher, that actually this teacher was just the same as him, doing the best that they could with how they thought it worked. And his good feeling coming back for his teacher, I mean, it was just amazing. And it was filled with anger and real hate at first, and then he could see that no, I can come from my good feeling, and she's just coming from whatever feeling state she's got, mood going in the moment. And he realized that some of his behaviors might be irritating to her because she doesn't understand how it works. And it was just beautiful, it was priceless. And now he can see that, and his relationships are changing because he can see that his feeling state, if he's off base, he's gone from his good feeling, his goodwill to that person, then he just knows that he's caught up in thought, and that it'll naturally correct, and he doesn't have to worry about it, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with him. And what was really lovely is that he could see that even though he has an autistic mind, and that works and processes slightly differently, he's just the same. He's just the same human being. And he didn't have that before he started to look in this direction. And I just think that's just a wonderful thing for him, to be able to see that he doesn't need to work hard to fit in. He already is perfect and whole.
Beautiful.
It was lovely.
Also, what a beautiful place to end. Looking at the time, that's what we need to do. I know. It's like time. Wow, what a rich conversation, ladies. I'm very, very grateful for your time, and more than anything, what the stories that you've been sharing. Really, really appreciate that, and I think people that are listening have said so already. Thank you very, very much for being with us.